Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Tommie Earl Jenkins, and welcome back to Joy to the Word, the Death Stranding edition, episode 4. This is the fourth of a 10-part series where we will once again be diving deep into the world of Death Stranding via the character interviews. Now, as I've said this before, that this is really a chance for those of you who've played the game, also for those of you who haven't and are considering playing the game, to hear some of the story, the in-depth information on how some of these characters have come to exist, and how some of these relationships were forged, as well as the history and lore behind Death Stranding. But be aware, they do contain some spoilers, so consider that before watching this. And now, just to also reiterate that the director's cut is being released on September 24th, 2021, which I'm sure you're all very excited about it, because I know that I am. So, mark those calendars. In this episode, we will be covering the interviews given by Fragile, played by the beautiful and mysterious Leah Sadu. And the titles that we will be exploring in this episode are Preppers, Cryptobiotes, Fragile's Father and Fragile Express, and What Became of Fragile. Now, as you can see, there is a much smaller amount of interviews in this particular episode, so in turn, it will be shorter. However, there are some very interesting points to cover within it. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started and see what Fragile has to say. I've got my trusty second pair. Let me just take a little sip. So a little bit about Fragile. She's described as a young woman who comes into contact with Sam at some point during the course of the game, which most of us know who she is if you've played it. She bears the logo on this leather jacket that she wears, entitled Fragile Express. And she has what is considered an executive role in the company. Now, Fragile's father was the founder of Fragile Express, and when he died, the torch was then passed down to her. She and her company eventually merged with none other than Higgs Monaghan's delivery company, drawn really to his vision of the future. Fragile also possesses dooms with an extinction factor that is higher than Sam's, allowing her to see BTs. Fragile's dooms also allow her to teleport to other locations in the world by moving through her beach and reappearing in the material world. But doing so also causes fatigue, so she uses this ability cautiously. Now, you can read a lot more about her, I'm sure, on any of the wiki pages. And just online, I'm sure there's a lot of things written by her. You can find people finding out stuff on Reddit. So yeah, have a look to discover a bit more about her. Interesting though, her tagline for Fragile Express is "Handled with Love," which I think is a play on "Handle with Care" on the packages that you see, which is also quite interesting. So, hitting this first interview entitled Preppers, it is given by Fragile 2 years ago, and it takes place in Lake Knot City. And she states, "When I was a little girl, my father told me preppers were people who decided long ago that they couldn't trust their nation to be there for them anymore, that the bonds between us had grown weak long before the Death Stranding. We once had a network spanning the whole wide world that could send items from anywhere to anywhere and connect anyone to anything. But still, we were so isolated. Still, we were alone. Some liked it that way and even wanted more. They wanted walls around their borders, wanted to turn away refugees and outsiders. Some even wanted new nations all their own. They began to see the state as an enemy of their freedom, not a protector of it. The ones most far gone, they didn't trust the country to defend them if something went really wrong. War, terrorism, natural disaster, you name it. So, They built shelters and stocked full of supplies in preparation for the worst. And then the worst happened: the death stranding. America ceased to exist, and their shelters became their homes, where they would live and they would die. But while they prepared, they hadn't prepared to live there forever, which is why they wound up relying on us couriers so heavily. My father and I didn't want to go back to the old America. We didn't want a country that pushed people apart. We wanted one that brought them together, that allowed them to support one another. And that was what we tried to work toward. So, the preppers, as I think we have probably discussed in previous episodes as well, is that, they are characters within the game who live alone or with their families. And they often appear holographically at their delivery terminals to speak with Sam. And and they don't typically come above ground. So that seems to be their only reason for coming up and to communicate with Sam. And those of you who know, he goes to the terminal. The whole point is to try to get these cities connected back onto the Chiral network. And so he goes, and once he completes an order, he passes it through, and he uses the Cupid to insert into the terminal, and everything happens, and that particular city is then connected back into the Chiral network. So they play a very important part in the game, and I think that their role is very important in terms of the deliveries that Sam has to make to them, as well as some of the interesting characters that we come across, which I won't necessarily go into, but you can look them up as well and see the various preppers that we have. Some you'll recognize some very famous faces as well within that. I think it's interesting that, she says that the bond had grown weak long before Death Stranding, due to not trusting the nation to be there for them. And that, to me is quite an important thing, because it's saying that everything had started to fall apart long before Death Stranding came and caused its destruction. They were a nation that felt like the connections and the ties were being broken. Not dissimilar to what I feel that we are once again going through in our world at the moment. But it was just saying that there was a weak link. The thread was weak, and it was eventually going to snap at some point. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe the snap that happened, the Death Stranding, took the world to a whole new different place. Now we can speculate how difficult or how much more destructive it would have been, and would the world have gone, in a destructive place regardless, but maybe not to that degree. So that's interesting to me. So yet the shelters became the homes of these preppers, and they built them in preparation for the worst. So it's kind of like they knew things. It's like a bunker, I suppose, is what I feel like I compare it to, is that they felt that there was eventually something going to happen in the world. They not necessarily knew when things would happen, but they could feel that the world was heading in a direction that maybe we need to think about this. We need to prepare. We need to get supplies in and have enough to see us through. Where she says, they would, where they became to a point where America ceased to exist, and the shelters became their homes, where they would eventually live and they would die. But while they prepared to live there forever, which is why they wound up relying on couriers so heavily, because getting deliveries in, because they weren't going to step outside. They had to deal with the possibility of timefall and BTs and all of those things. And interesting enough, the BT situation would be because they couldn't see them. They didn't have the ability to see them unless you were connected to a BB, or if you had dooms and was able to sense all of those things. So what an interesting time to be living in that respect, because it was devastating. It's horrific. And they were isolated and all alone, and if they were fortunate enough to have a family with them, I suppose that was a good thing. But imagine being, just one, having to live your entire life in this bunker by yourself. I feel you'd kind of go a little bit stir crazy. And I dare say that some of them probably did. But this is all, we can speculate about so many things about it, about what happens in this story. And there's so much information that is kind of thrown at us in dribs and drabs, and some of it is big information. But yeah, so let me know what you think about that, the preppers, and also Fragile's interpretation or her thoughts on all that. Moving on to the second interview, which is listed as Cryptobiotes. Once again, this is an interview given by Fragile. It was also 2 years ago, and this took place at Fragile Express HQ. And she states, "We call these bugs cryptobiotes. They were recorded in reference books and databases back before the Death Stranding, but nobody ever thought to give them a proper classification. So, cryptobiotes, they stayed. They're named for the process of cryptobiosis, which means hidden life. When environmental conditions get too harsh or resources too scarce, cryptobiotes can shut down their metabolic processes and enter an almost death-like state in order to survive. Tardigrades and sleeping chironomids are capable of this too. But cryptobiotes are on a whole other level. They can survive anything and anywhere, even on the beach or in the seam. And they aren't capable of prolonging only their own lives. Humans who eat them acquire a limited resistance to timefall too. And you won't find them lying around just anywhere, though. You need to know where to look. And not many people even knew they existed until recently. So next to no research has been done. But now that their beneficial properties have been recognized, I'm willing to bet they'll play an important role in helping us to understand the beach, the Death Stranding, and everything else." So, cryptobiotes. If you haven't seen them, Google them. They're to me, they're like a grub. They look like a grub, and I think my first reaction when I saw them and they ate them was typical, is how I would see anyone who eats grubs. It's not something that I feel I could do. It doesn't sit right with me. But having said that, if I was living in this world and I knew how beneficial eating a cryptobiote would be, I dare say I would probably do it. And to say that it is a small life form which, when ingested, replenishes a small amount of a person's blood. They're also capable of traveling between Earth and the other side, the other world. What I find interesting is that they can enter this death-like state in order to survive in conditions that are harsh. But also, like these tardigrades that I also looked up, they're also known as water bears or moss piglets, which is, it's a kind of a cute name. But if you look them up, you can see why they are referred to that. So that's tardigrades, also known as water bears or moss piglets. Sleeping chironomids are also fascinating in how they survive. So also, if you get a chance to look those up, have a little research day and find some stuff out about those. This is interesting because we realize how important the cryptobiotes are. But she says that nobody ever thought to give them proper classification. And they've been around for a while. But the idea that their name actually means hidden life. So you get a sense of that it is a way of prolonging or sustaining one's life for a period of time if you get a chance to, if you're fortunate enough, I suppose, to find one. What's also interesting is that they have a way of entering their a death-like state, so that they can survive. And I think what I saw or read about with the water bears, they, if they're in mud and the mud dries up, they can sort of stay there, put themselves into a state to survive this sort of drought, dryness, until water comes again, and they kind of revive when they're hit by water. Almost like a gremlin, but except the gremlins turn into naughty things. But that's interesting that they, imagine if we as a human race were able to do something like that. Do you know what I mean? If we knew that we're in danger or living conditions are harsh, we can put ourselves into a certain state that will help us survive until that passes. And it's interesting. Is that something that, I know that our genetic makeup is not made up of these things, but I find it interesting that another life form, like many other life forms out there that we have come across and know about, that work far differently and are far more advanced in their way of living than we as humans are in some way, because they can regenerate. They can put themselves into this state and survive, maybe during a void out or whatever, and then bring themselves back when the time is right. The interesting thing is I don't know how long they're able to stay like that, but certainly during a crisis, that's a very interesting. That would be a cool superpower, I suppose, in some respects, if we had to look at it like that as well. But the also thing is, she's saying you don't find them lying around anywhere. You have to know where to look. And a lot of people didn't know that they actually existed. So that's probably why there was no research done. And then they realized the beneficial properties that they had. And here's the other thing: how did you discover that eating one of them would be something that would be beneficial to one's life? But it's true. I think they would help in understanding the beach and the death stranding and probably a lot of other things, like she says. So very, very, very interesting with that. Cryptobiotes. Yeah, so have a look at the water bears and the moss piglets, and let me know your thoughts and how maybe you compare them and how they function as well. Let's go ahead and move on to the next interview, which is Fragile's father and Fragile Express. Now, this is given by Fragile 1 year ago and takes place in Lake Knot City. And she states, "My father came up with the name Fragile Express before I was born. The U.S. was a Swiss cheese back then. All the void outs had left craters as far as the eye could see. People were losing their minds looking for a way out. They thought the government would have their back. but it was gone. All the systems, all the gears that kept their world turning, smashed to bits in a matter of seconds. When everything you know breaks, it's hard not to break yourself. Before our network, there was an old one. The whole nation was online 24/7. Cameras and microphones everywhere, watching and listening and recording. There was a strange sort of comfort in that, people said. A certainty that someone, somewhere, would know if you were in trouble. But after the stranding, that all vanished into the ether. No one was looking out anymore. No one was coming to save you. Now, a lot of folks died waiting before the rest caught on and took matters into their own hands. My father was one of the latter. He'd been working for a private logistics company, and he and some friends figured they were in a position to bring people supplies and repair vital infrastructure Americans used to rely on to survive. They were builders. Men and women who understood the value of what was lost and wanted to reclaim it. My father and them really believed that they could get it all back, bit by bit, and make us whole. Make us America. It was a precious, fragile dream, like so much back then. But if we nurtured it, if they stayed true, he knew it could all be ours again. People, ideas, connections, all so fragile. The USA was nothing more than a network of people and the connections between them. No wonder it broke apart so easily. But everything that's worth something is fragile. That's why I was given this name. My father's not with us anymore, but the bond between us remains, fragile though it is. So, we now know where the name Fragile Express came from, and well before Fragile was born, according to that. I love the fact that she states that the U.S. was Swiss cheese back then, because all the void outs had left craters as far as the eye could see. And you can almost picture that. You can imagine it, because you know what the craters look like, and imagine that darted across the nation. Yes, I imagine it would look like some Swiss cheese, which is quite funny in my head as a visual, but not a funny situation, believe me. And people were beside themselves. They were losing their minds looking for a way out of all of this. And they thought that the government would have their back, but felt that there was no help from them. That they weren't there to protect or support them or to indeed save them. And I get that. When everything that breaks, it's like your life comes to, you're at your wit's end. That feeling of thinking everything that I have is broken. And how hard is it not to let yourself be broken by the circumstances? We're living in this time again, and we talk about it daily, that I know people are probably sick of hearing about COVID. And, but there are people who we've all been suffering to a degree. There are those who have suffered more than others by family loss and all of that, which is absolutely devastating, and to feel that the world itself is going through something so global, it is very hard to keep oneself going. And you feel that you can see how people can break. They get to, they reach the end of their rope, so to speak, because they're, a loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of a way of living, losing your home because you can't afford, you don't have a job so that you can pay your rent. And, your bills start to pile up, and then hoping that the government will be there to help see you through. People are going through getting on unemployment. The rate of unemployment is skyrocketed, and people trying to get through and trying to get what is due them and to try to get some kind of help. It's a terrible, terrible time for all involved, and we're all trying to get through it the best way we can. So it does really paint a picture that the world itself is fragile at the moment. You know, then she talks about the nation being online for 24/7 with cameras, microphones everywhere, watching and listening and recording. And we as a nation, we as a world are doing exactly that. And there she's talking before that, but we are currently in that state because obviously this is into the future. But everything that we do online, in terms of communication, 24/7, it is. We are a 24/7 situation with YouTube channels, FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Twitch, and in a Discord, all of these platforms that allow us to have cameras, microphones. We're watching, we're listening, we're recording. There is nothing this day and age where you're online or on the internet and you're recording that is, people are connected to you. You can stay connected to the entire world 24/7 if you chose to. For those people who love streaming games and those channels, amazing stuff out there, and people will sit and they will watch and they will take part and be, I appreciate the people who come onto this channel and will, when we do the live chats, who will interact, or when I've done live Q&As. That is something you can be connected to the world. And also what's interesting, she says that a certainty that someone somewhere would know if you were in trouble. And I suppose to a degree, if something was to go wrong or you didn't broadcast for a while, that is, someone would eventually know to maybe look into this and help. Have they disbanded their channel, or are they okay? We haven't heard from them in a while, or, Instagram lives, the stories, all of these things that connect us now in this day and age, keeps us out there. It keeps people current and keeping things going, but also it keeps you connected to people in ways that are very beneficial. It also connects us in ways to people that in some ways can be detrimental, because we do also live in an age where people take it upon themselves to hide behind these cameras or these microphones, or the social platforms, and dealing with bullying, racist taunting, a lot of stuff, so there's pros and cons to it all. And I would like for us to all just get to the pros of it, and find ways that it helps us individually, but helps everyone. I think people have done a great service by streaming, by doing certain things that people can watch and inspire, or give people something to enjoy or be a part of, where they can also take part in. And so I think that those things are really important because it connects us, in certain ways that we've never been able to do before. And I think that's kind of what's wrong with our world in a way. I think we have this amazing technology, and yet there's ways in which this technology can be so destructive to us. But we need to find a way to keep it where it is beneficial to us. And that that is something that we just as a race have to learn to do, and also to become aware. I think awareness plays a big part in everything. If you are aware, you're consciously aware of what you're doing or how it's affecting someone. You either have to take responsibility for something you said or you did or whatever, and really try to find a way to think, okay, I must remember to use this platform for the greater good. I don't want it. I don't want the platform to go out there and I don't want to be negative. You know, we live in a time where there's so much negativity around us that isn't it? It's easier to be the other way. It takes believe me, it takes a lot of effort to be negative. So I think, you know, if we can all try and find a way to curb that, you know, things would be a lot better. Maybe we can all unite a bit better as a nation, as a race, and just seeing the other side. So interesting, though, enough, starting this company, you know, and I love the tagline, handled with love, making these deliveries. And interesting how she teamed up with Higgs, but that's another story, which we will get into. So listen, I think that in dealing with all of this, we realize, you know, she says, people, ideas, connections, all so fragile, and that the U.S. was nothing more than a network of people and the connections between them. So no wonder that it broke so easily. So it just, all of those things, those categories, people's ideas and connections, we realize how fragile those things are for many different reasons. So something to definitely think about. Let me know what you think about Fragile's father and what he did. What do you think of Fragile Express and how it's being handled and used? Yeah. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but I like that. So let's go ahead and move on to what became of Fragile. This was given by Fragile. This is 3 weeks before the inauguration, and it takes place at Bridges HQ. And she states, I've been thinking a lot about my father recently. I'd like to think he'd be happy if he were here. Now that Sam's made us whole again, he'd have his America back. Not that things are perfect. It's far from it. The death stranding's still a thing, and people aren't free to go where they please. So the UCA's prospects don't look too great. But I'm not going to stand by and let it fall apart. After all, it's a symbol of everything my father held dear. Freedom and community. It's bigger than any one of us. Bigger than all of us still standing. We're only here because of those who came before. My father and everyone else back through the generations. I appreciate that more these days, I suppose, and I want to honor the people who made me who I am. That's why I've joined Bridges. I spent too long wrestling with the past, obsessed with getting revenge on Higgs. But the past can't be changed. All I can do now is build upon it and help deliver everyone a brighter future. Fragile Express is back in business. So that concludes the last interview from Fragile in these character interviews. But like I said, you can find out a lot more about her, I believe, online, and just do some research if you're interested to know more about her and the connection with Higgs, which I won't go into because there's going to be stuff coming up that's going to pretty much touch on a lot of that. And you know, and she says she thinks that her father would be happy if he were here now, that Sam has made us whole. So this, like I said, this is 3 weeks before the inauguration. So Sam has completed everything that he needed to do, and to get America back online, and the Cairo network is up and running. And yes, I think it's everything that her father stood for. And like she said, things aren't perfect. They're far from it. They're still dealing with the death stranding, and people aren't free to go where they please because of timefall and BTs. So the prospects don't look too great. That's pretty much like saying, you know, the government's doing what they can, but it doesn't look that great. We're still dealing with a pandemic. We're still dealing with the aftermath, or still in the thick of things. But the government, the administration will always be the person, or the organization that we look to help us eradicate, help us to fix, and get things back to some kind of normality. So yes, it is truly the death stranding still a thing. But she's saying she's not going to stand by and let it fall apart. It's a symbol of everything that her father held dear. So she is also remembering that the torch had been passed down to her. She was named after this, so she holds a very close connection to this, and Fragile Express living up to its name. Based on what her father set up. And it's a symbol of everything that he held dear. But also saying that freedom and community is bigger than any one of us, even standing, and that we're here because of those who came before. And that is so true. We are only here because of those people who came before us, for a lot of different reasons. We can touch on a lot of different things, both politically, humanity-wise, in a lot of different aspects. We have religious leaders, we have civil rights leaders, we have gay activists for the LGBTQ plus community, we have other organizations for a lot of different things, personal mental illness, and things people have fought for all these causes. These people who have come before us have allowed us to stand on their shoulders. So we in turn stand on their shoulders, and those coming up behind us, we are now building that pyramid or that ladder for them to now stand on our shoulders. So it is up to us to set the examples for things moving forward for the greater good. If we're going to stand on those who came before us and carry the torch, then we have to allow that next generation to look forward and to be able to reach down and lift them up, to get them onto our shoulders. But we have to be a foundation. We have to be solid and unanimous in our way of moving things forward for the greater good. It's the only way. And this is once again, this is only my opinion on it. People may think differently, and that's absolutely fine, and that's their right. And I respect that, because I do try to see both sides from everyone. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But she says, that's why she joined Bridges. And I think she feels that was a way to help advance things further, with making those deliveries, and joining an organization that has much more to offer, that cohesively they can work together and make a big change. And she's saying that all she can do is build upon it and help to deliver everyone a brighter future. And that's all we want. That's all I would imagine that's all we are looking for. We're wanting to provide a brighter future for our children, a brighter future for everyone involved in living their life, so that we can live in a world that is as accommodating as best it can be with all the things to offer. You know, America's a wonderful country. It's not without its flaws, but the world in general, every country has something, you know, and I'd like to think that we all are thinking in that direction to build a brighter future. And as you know, some people are in the mind of thinking, oh, well, that just sounds corny. It's never going to be possible. But I think the mindset has to change in order for these things to also move forward. People's mindset. So I love this character. I think she is, you know, and the fact that she can, you know, teleport. You know, she's got this umbrella which allows her to teleport to anywhere in the world. And with that, you know, I think Sam has come in contact with her, and she's allowed that to happen with him. But once again, you know, I don't want to go too far with some things, you know, because these episodes do have spoilers in them, and so you know you want to tread a little carefully. So I'm also trying to honor some of that by letting you know that. But it's also great for those people who've played the game, like I said, who haven't had a chance to read these interviews, because they are within the game. So just know that if you don't, and you can read them. I think they're unlocked at certain points, but it's also enlightening for you to think about on your journey when you're playing it. So I hope that people can find these useful. Just having the discussion about them. So that, my friends, concludes episode 4 of Joy to the Word, the Death Stranding edition, Fragile. Which I thoroughly enjoyed. It was one of our shorter episodes. Coming up is going to be quite a lengthy one. I think we hit with Hartman next in episode 5, and that's a lot of information. So the format is going to change slightly in order to get through all of those. I think there's like 34 interviews. So I do want to have discussions, but I think you will also find that with that one is going to be a course of I need to read these, get through them, and you know, and maybe have a little discussion perhaps after. I haven't really decided, or whether I was going to break it into 2 parts. But I will keep you posted on how all of that goes. But there's a lot of information. He is a wonderful character. If you haven't come to know about him, it's a brilliant character. So listen, I am going to conclude this episode of Joy to the Word, the Death Stranding edition, and to say thank you once again so much. This comes out on Friday the 20th. 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, and 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So I look forward to having the chat with you then during the drop of the episode. I'll be chatting live. And listen, stay strong. Keep your head up. Keep the love in your heart. Spread it wherever you can. And just know that we're all in this together. I hope you've been enjoying this as much as I've been enjoying sharing these things with you. And with that said, only one thing left to say, and that is keep on keeping on.